Welcome to the CEC Report. It's December 16th. I'm Robert Barwick, and I'm joined again by CEC founder and leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie.
In today's CEC Report, we're going to talk about the fact that the Christmas New Year period is the danger period for thermonuclear war. Burke and Abbott team up to sacrifice the Murray-Darling food growers, and Australia is in a death spiral binge on debt and derivatives. So first, Christmas New Year is the danger period for thermonuclear war. This week, Lyndon LaRouche was pretty blunt in issuing a warning about how close the war danger is. He said the war threat has cancelled Christmas. Between now and early January, we have the danger period for an attack on Iran and Syria. And LaRouche said the scenario will be an incident that is blamed on Iran. Once it's blamed on Iran, that will be the trigger for Israel under that madman Netanyahu to bomb Iran and bomb Syria on the way to Iran. Iran will retaliate to such an attack. America will defend Israel, and of course then Russia and China will stand up behind Iran and Syria. And as we've discussed here in recent weeks, Russia has a naval base on the coastline of Syria, which would make Russia a direct target of such an attack. Now, in this context, one of the signs that points to this being such a danger is that we know the British want thermonuclear war. It's an imperial policy of theirs. They're using Obama as their tool to get it. Part of their behaviour, though, is they are targeting Russia, Craig, like mad. Last week there was a scandal involving Hillary Clinton, the US Secretary of State, which I'd like you to explain to the audience. This scandal, though, shows the lengths that they're willing to go to put Russia at odds with the West.
Yeah. Well, last week, the scandal was that Hillary Clinton came out and basically made a quite undiplomatic remark relating to the way the elections were just run in Russia. But this wasn't just Hillary Clinton talking. This wasn't normally what she would do, but rather it was the fact that you had the former leader of the former USSR, Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, actually in contact with Obama, right? But also people like Susan Rice, Madeleine Albright, and so forth. This represents the British establishment behind the scenes. Or, Mr. LaRouche back always said that Gorbachev, and I quote, was the first General Secretary of the Communist Party to be publicly vetted by the Queen of England, because with a visit to London in 1984, just months before assuming the top job, obviously the Queen gave the nod to her British agent in Russia. And Gorbachev was also the guy that demanded the elimination of Lyndon LaRouche at the US-Russia summit in 1986, specifically to Ronald Reagan, because of what was... it was in response.
Reagan was handing out the olive branch to Russia of LaRouche's proposal for the SDI.
That's right, at that point, which we talked about last week.
And Gorbachev knocked it back and said instead, no, if you want further collaboration, LaRouche has to go.
Yeah, so the scandal comes in that you had this high-level discussion with these British agents to the British puppet Obama. Obama then tells Hillary Clinton, as the Secretary of State, you have to say some harsh words against Putin. So she did. She did say something, first of all, but then Obama contacted her a second time and said that wasn't good enough. Do it again. Ratchet it up. So you had this strategic attack by Hillary Clinton on behalf of Obama to Putin. What's the issue here, though? Because Putin is the president that came in to Russia at a time that Russia had suffered at least about a decade of actual genocide. And Sergei Glaziev, the well-known Russian economist, actually published a book called Genocide, which went through the looting operations that happened under Gorbachev after the wall fell down. And Russia's population literally disintegrated at that point. It wasn't just hundreds of thousands of people, but millions of people actually died. And the population replacement in that period was such that Russia was going backwards.
And this looting operation was directed by London, incidentally by the same people who directed Jeff Kennett's privatisation program in Victoria.
The same people, the Mont Pelerin Society, people like Gardere, Guaido and people like this. These are people that are part of this policy direction of looting nation states. And I think it's really specifically, really interesting when you have a look at the EIR article, and this is published by our organisation, the Executive Intelligence Review, as a strategic magazine, and there's an article in there written by Rachel Douglas, London's Gorbachev is a key figure in the destabilisation of Russia. And she references in the first couple of paragraphs the fact that the Economist magazine basically spilled its guts on the 10th of December to say what the game plan is. And what it says, and the editorial said that Putin must, quote, clean up the Kremlin and modernise its economy by opening up to foreign finance, because Mr. Putin has failed to build the rules-based system that provides the economic security for that foreign investors need. Rules-based system. Now, was it just a couple of weeks ago that Obama was out here talking about how China wasn't playing by the rules? What are those rules? Bankers' rules.
Rules for the banks.
Rules for the banks. Rules for looting. Rules for globalisation. So the issue is that Putin represents the national sovereign interest of Russia. He's been shown to fight for it. He actually reversed the death rates in Russia. And here you have the British imperial networks behind Gorbachev and others literally trying to get rid of this guy. And we haven't seen the end of this. There's going to be a lot more, I suspect, in the coming weeks and months to get rid of him, or try and get rid of him. Whether it's successful or not, we don't know.
Well, and the nasty thing about what Obama did to Hillary and made Hillary do, of course, is Hillary has worked very hard for 3 years to reset America's relationship with Russia. She has a close relationship with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. And when Obama made her make this second statement, he didn't give her any time to call Lavrov and do what normal diplomacy would say you should do.
And it's the idea in this Western media down here, you'd think that the Russians hate the US, that they despise. That's not true. Putin wants to collaborate with Obama and so forth, but he can't. The guy's nuts. I mean, Obama is nuts, and there's no willingness on the US side because Obama is a British stooge.
Well, just on that, we should point out that people will see this in the press from today's the December 16th, so they'll see it today or tomorrow, that Putin gave a speech overnight in Russia, and when they get it reported in the press, they'll be told that in that speech Putin rejected the insistence on election observers, but it was a 4-hour address.
4 hour, 35 minutes.
4.5-hour address.
And that's the nature of what Putin's trying to do. And he has developed economic relationships, diplomatic relationships with China to try and develop the Far East of Russia, which is a vast, very wealthy area actually for mineral deposits, but completely depopulated. So Putin, despite most of what you hear, if not all what you hear in the Western media about Putin, is usually British propaganda. And of course you have to take together the different cultural differences, but the issue for us is to make sure that we don't see a sovereign country that's never been conquered actually by anyone fall. If we see that, then you're going to see a real escalation of this British policy of population reduction from the earth on the face of the planet from 7 billion down to 1 billion.
And that's what made LaRouche's intervention into this Hillary scandal so crucial, because what he said is he was the only one to say, hang on, what you're being told in the press that Russia is at odds with America because of Hillary Clinton's statement isn't true. And in fact, Hillary Clinton herself is being put up to do this, and she's being set up. So that went around the world and helps give the strategic thinkers something to balance what they're being told. Sure. All right, so thanks for that, Craig. When we come back, we're going to discuss the latest on the fight to save the Murray-Darling Basin. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So, Burke and Abbott team up to sacrifice Murray-Darling food growers. The town of Griffith, which is one of the central towns in the Murray-Darling Basin, especially the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, held their MDBA consultation meeting on December the 15th, so that's yesterday our time.
Yeah, I mean, I think our viewers need to know that Griffith, 100 years ago, was literally carved out of the desert as an irrigation town. This was nothing before the irrigation system. So here you have a town that is completely dependent on the water resources allocated to it or in the river, and basically the intention of the Murray-Darling plan is to take that water away.
And they're being told as an alternative they can farm sheep. Now, so of course what Craig said is true, and the people who know that the best are the residents themselves. And to show the depth of feeling, something like 10 to 12,000 of them turned up to challenge Tony Burke and Craig Knowles at this consultation meeting. And they reckon if you put that in proportion to population, that would be the equivalent of a public meeting in Melbourne that filled 3 MCGs, 300,000 people.
We haven't seen a protest like that for...
You just don't see it. So we were there. The CEC had a strong presence there, led by the CEC's national chairman, Anne Lawler. Now, Anne got to confront Tony Burke with a very serious question, and Anne's question actually cut through a lot of the noise, and the whole audience went quiet when they were listening to it, and she got to say quite a lot. She very plainly laid out the fact that ecosystems, the concept of ecosystems, are a fraud cooked up by British eugenicists. She stated clearly that of all the political parties in Australia, only the CEC is fighting this plan, and the reason she did that I'll talk about in a minute because Tony Abbott was there. She referenced this documentary that we've been talking about here lately and in our publications on the BBC called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, which we talked about in a press release recently, which goes through this ecosystem fraud as well. And she also said that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan would lead to genocide. Then Anne made the point that Tony Burke was a member of the Wilderness Society and has stated that he will be remembered by history for putting the environment first. So she asked Tony Burke if he was also prepared to go down in history for crimes against humanity. Now, there's a certain format to these meetings, Craig, that...
They try and keep a lid on them, yes.
They're definitely keeping a lid. And one of the formats which is relevant to Anne's question is, instead of having a back and forth question, answer, where the answerer, the Burke or Knowles or whoever, is forced to engage directly with the questioner, they've changed the format so that the questions are asked in batches, 10 or 20 questions in a row, and then Burke or Knowles will pick the eyes out of which ones they want to answer. Yeah. So Burke had the option of ignoring Anne's question when he finally, because she was not the last question in the line, but he didn't, because obviously what she said about the Wilderness Society and the fact he was a member of it stung him. So he went to damage control and he made a big deal about downplaying his association with the Wilderness Society and claimed that he had been a member, yes, but only when he was 14. Well, that's probably hard to prove, so we won't go there necessarily, but more telling than Burke, we know what Burke's agenda is, he's part of the government, was Tony Abbott. And Tony Abbott turned up to manipulate the audience, and what he did was extremely manipulative. He started off by saying something very profound, which was that this is a food bowl, first and foremost. It's Australia's most important food bowl. He said this should be the food bowl for Asia. Food production is the most important thing. And of course, he was stating a moral truth, and he had the whole audience with him. That went without saying. But remember, Tony Abbott's party passed the Water Act. That's the reason this whole mess is there, right?
Because Tony Abbott's party is committed to free trade, committed to globalisation, and committed to all the policies that are basically the flip side of this radical environmentalism stuff. It's the same coin.
The other prong of the British Crown's genocide pitchfork. So he had this strong agreement from the crowd, and then he told the crowd who were agreeing with him that they also agreed with him that the river needed more water. Well, no, they don't agree with that. That's why 12,000 of them were there. But of course, unfortunately for the crowd, they want Tony Abbott to save them. They know a member of parliament can disallow this plan, right? They want that. And this is where it was very manipulative. And then the worst thing he did, he ended his speech by telling the crowd that they should respect Tony Burke for turning up there today. Now, this is a crowd that's very angry. They wanted to lynch this guy who's going to destroy this town, right? And the man they think is going to save him is telling them, no, you should respect him. Craig, when you look at Abbott's manipulative sleaze, when you look at the format of these meetings to suppress the sort of back and forth between the crowd, it indicates that these people that are ramming through this plan, they're desperate to suppress the rage that they know is capable of defeating the plan.
It's a completely controlled environment. What Anne did was she tried to get the rabbit to pop out of the hat, so to speak. This is what's under here. This is this lump in the middle of the floor that no one's noticing. This is the British Crown. Tony Abbott is a monarchist. The guy supports the policies of the British Empire, the British Crown. You have the Gillard government run by Fabian socialists. You know, the intention is population reduction. So you have a controlled situation, a contrived situation, and all we have to do actually is to get people to realise that they are in this controlled situation and do things that aren't involving staying inside the system.
Break out of the control.
Break out of the control. Now, we've provided the information through our latest New Citizen on that. We've given that chapter and verse. That's why Tony Burke freaked out, because we have a large section on the role of the Wilderness Society, literally as the shock troops of Prince Philip personally. And we laid that out in Tasmania about how they, you know, the founders of that initial group, the Wilderness Society, bragged that they would do the foot slogging for Prince Philip personally. So Tony Burke knows this stuff, right? He may not let on, but it doesn't really matter. The pedigree of this institution is actually promoting genocide through radical environmentalism. And what we've said is this goes back to the Crown. So we're giving people the basis of understanding what the entire political game plan here is. And if people begin to mobilise this in the way that they potentially can, which is what the 10 to 12,000 people coming to Griffith means, if they mean to mobilise seriously, then this is going to be an enormous problem for the Gillard government. Imagine if you had a 200, 300,000 person rally in the streets of Melbourne because all the relatives of all the families in the Murray-Darling Basin started to mobilise. Simply go to a rally or get our production of our newspaper out. I mean, that's real power. To coordinate that is what we've been doing in the Murray-Darling Basin, and what Anne demonstrated, is that these guys are straw men. They're terrified that someone's going to put a match under their arse and blow them up. Now, that's not the intention of the public, but I mean, you're talking about literally killing people's livelihood, killing people's lives, actually, and people will suicide.
Well, there are people at that meeting yesterday that will commit suicide as this
exactly,
goes
and
through.
it's not a question of arbitrary, judgment. It's a question of reality that this is really going to affect people's lives.
Well, so it's building, and we will monitor it closely because, of course, we're right in the middle of it. So we'll leave it at that. Then when we come back, we're going to have a quick discussion about how Australia is on a binge of debt and derivatives. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So finally, Australia is on a death spiral binge of debt and derivatives. Since the global financial crisis, which, officially erupted in September 2008, actually in July 2007, which is when LaRouche first called it. But everyone knows, no one could deny what happened in September 2008. Lehman Brothers, AIG, the whole system blew out. Unfortunately, in the 3 years since then, Australia has gone nuts, literally gone nuts, on the very things that caused the crisis. Debt and derivatives gambling. So we've updated our figures. We've produced two graphs which are available on our website on Australia's foreign debt and the derivatives exposure of Australia's major banks. The foreign debt of Australia in the last quarter, 3 months, skyrocketed $100 billion in 3 months. The last time we saw that rate of increase was in the 3 months before the September 2008 GFC blowout. And when you have that kind of binge, that tells you that there's a panicked flurry of activity. Of the total foreign debt, which is now 1.4 trillion, an all-time record, 856 billion of that is owed by the banks. So, Craig, isn't the fact these figures show our economy is addicted to this debt?
Oh, it's a staggering sort of jump of $100 billion in 1 quarter. But I mean, this is the death throes, Robbie, of the financial system. I mean, look what's happening in Europe. I mean, the Reserve Bank came out this week and warned that Australia is not immune, and we're going to see some very serious times in the next period ahead because of the European debt. It's not because of the European debt. It's because our banking system is so indebted itself that it can't survive if you're trying to turn over. Where's this money going to come from? $1.4 trillion. A lot of it, as you say, $800 billion of it is overseas. Where's that money going to come from, Robbie, if there's no credit to be had from international banks?
We're still borrowing debt to roll over old debt.
It's insane.
And generating more.
But that's not even the derivatives pictures, because when I saw these graphs again, I was absolutely stunned at the jump in the derivatives, off balance sheet derivatives of the Commonwealth Bank. I mean, it's actually incredible how much they've got involved in that.
Well, we've been putting out graphs on bank derivatives since 1994, and this year, for the first year, the Commonwealth Bank is not the lowest in derivatives exposure. It's jumped to the second highest very quickly. So the other banks increased marginally in 3 years. The Commonwealth Bank doubled its derivatives.
And these things, their derivatives are basically gambling debts. They're what can you say? They're but bets on the way currencies are going to move, interest rates are going to move. You've got credit swaps and interest rate swaps. These things are off the balance sheet, and they say, oh, it doesn't really affect us. But there's an enormous amount of them. I think what's the total now?
$3 trillion for the Commonwealth Bank, 17 trillion for the total Australian banking system.
But that's up from 14.2 since the global financial crisis. So you've had an addiction, a continuation of this process of these paper assets, these valueless assets, which are off the balance sheet, sure, but they do have a claim on the balance sheets of the banks in times where those things turn sour. Right, this is like a normal bet. Of course, you put a bet down without paying for it, you lose. You've got to pay for it. It's the same thing. So, I mean, the fact that our banks are so up to the neck in these is really worrying. But even more worrying, the fact is that the trend is moving into more of them. When are we going to get to $25 trillion worth of these things?
Well, and what occurred to me is, as we've talked about here for 2 weeks now, this month is the 100th anniversary of this Commonwealth Bank. And this Commonwealth Bank was founded as a national bank. And when Keating privatised it, we saw the decline of it. And it looks like with these figures, we're now seeing the fall of this bank.
It's dead. I mean, there's nothing of the Commonwealth Bank that used to be the Commonwealth Bank left. And people should get away from their romantic ideas of what the Commonwealth Bank used to be. We could bring it back. The CEC has a policy for the Commonwealth National Credit Bank. We wrote a book about it in 2001, I think it was. We released our book in What Australia Must Do. With that, how you go about creating a national bank. But the principle of a national bank is it's a government-owned bank for the purposes of developing the physical economy of the nation and the prosperity of the nation first and foremost. The private banks would be chartered. They're brought under control for that aim, for that mission. Today we have a banking system that controls the government, it controls the economy, and it controls the welfare of everyone's life.
Yep. All right, well, we better leave it at that. Again, as usual, the material we've talked about, look on our website for it. You can, especially the details of these graphs, and see for yourself. So that's it for this week's CEC Report. Stay tuned for future weeks for more developments.